Well, hello again, students. We are now ready to start part 2 of chapter 2.2, Age of Explorers. This video is going to talk about 3 more explorers that had an impact in Washington State history. So here we go. This here is a map, 1792, of what they thought this area looked like. And as you can see, there is no Northwest Passage going through the middle of our country like what Juan de Fuca said. So let's start off with talking about Robert Gray. This was actually his second trip to the Pacific Northwest, this 1791 to 1792 trip. This second trip, he was focused on trading furs with China because he had heard about how rich people could get off these furs. During this trip, he actually found the Columbia River. He was the first, I guess we could say, white man to find this great river. And when he first tried to explore it, the river was much too rough, the seas too choppy, he could not make it. He waited the next morning, however, the tide was too low, and as a result, a sandbar was actually blocking the way between the river entrance and the ocean. Now, I have never been to the Columbia River during this time. If you guys have, maybe you know what that looks like. In fact, I have never seen the mouth or where the Columbia River enters the Pacific Ocean. Take a moment maybe and pause the video, go online and just search up mouth of the Columbia River and see if you can find out what it actually looks like when the tide's out, or what it looks like when the river is emptying into the ocean. See if you can find a video about that. So pause the video and see if you can find that. If you're able to, tell me tomorrow in class. Maybe we can finagle some extra credit. So anyways, the tide was down too low. He couldn't get in. So he waited till high tide. And what he did is he sent some smaller boats up through the river. When they made it in safe, then he followed through with his bigger ship. Now, he spent 9 days trading with the Native Americans, getting furs and whatnot, giving them small trinkets, things that they thought the natives would like that maybe they didn't have. And something to note here is he learned that the natives were getting their otter pelts, which is something they really, really wanted, from the ocean and not from the river. As a result, they're like, okay, let's go back and get those pelts for ourselves. So they went into the ocean and they didn't do any more exploration of the Columbia River. All right, had some technical difficulties. So let's continue on. As I was saying, some miscellaneous items to talk about is when Robert Gray landed or went through the Columbia River, he claimed both sides of the river for the United States of America. Some other side notes about the trading. Not all the tradings went off well with the natives. Reading through the journals, when they weren't in the Columbia, they did have some mishaps with the natives. They actually attacked some of the natives and killed some of the natives that were coming out to meet his ship. The Americans, Gray, felt threatened, so they would fire warning shots, and if the natives continued towards them, they would fire their cannons at the natives' canoe and blow them up. There was an instance where some of Gray's men were actually killed when they went ashore on themselves to kind of scout out the area. So not everything was peachy, though they did have some positive trading times with the natives. Moving on to George Vancouver, and we're going to talk about his 1792 exploration of the area. And he had actually been to the Pacific Northwest before when when Captain Cook, James Cook, went through the Pacific Northwest. So he actually knew a little bit about the area and about the natives. Now, George Vancouver explored the Columbia River after Gray did. And when he went through the Columbia River, he actually claimed both sides of the Great River for Great Britain. So we're starting to see here some competing claims on the Pacific Northwest. This is going to come back to haunt both the Americans and the British later in history. Now, George Vancouver mapped a lot of the Puget Sound region. In fact, he was the first European to enter this area. And you'll notice a lot of the place names in this area, such as Mount Baker, Mount Rainier, Whidbey Island, Puget Sound, and Port Townsend, were named by George Vancouver. And these names also, Townsend, Whidbey, Puget, Baker, Rainier, are actually also names of George Vancouver's friends. What a coincidence. He also named an island after himself, Vancouver Island, where the city of Victoria, British Columbia is. He also was the first to say that Vancouver Island was actually an island and not attached to the mainland. Here are some maps that were created because of George Vancouver's extensive mapping. As we can see, the detail brought along here, here's Whidbey Island. He does show Whidbey Island, though, being attached to the mainland, which, in fact, it is not. Here's also Vancouver Island. Victoria is right about here. Here are some other very detailed maps. Now, if you read commentaries on George Vancouver, he was extremely detailed. And the reason he was so detailed is because, first off, he needed to let other sailors know what was in the area for safety. Second off, he wanted to make sure that people knew he had been there. Look at Juan de Fuca. Why did people think that Juan de Fuca never went to the Pacific Northwest? Pause the video and see if you can remember. All right, let's move on here. Lewis and Clark, 1804. A little background real quick. Louisiana Purchase was a deal where America purchased Louisiana in 1803 from France. So we have all this new territory that is now belonging to the United States of America. And President Jefferson wanted it to be explored. He wanted to see if there was a possible route across the continent by river travel. He also wanted to learn about the new terrain. I mean, it's theirs. What resources do we have? So Jefferson's secretary, by the name of Meriwether Lewis, and a friend from the Army, Lieutenant William Clark, were in charge of this exploration, and they had some other men go with them as well. They started off from St. Louis, as we can see from the map, and they went up and they actually wintered in the Dakotas. They then took a boat, as we can see on the map, continuing on the Missouri River. They then went north through the Rockies into Idaho. This is where they went. And when you read the textbook, you read a little bit more about how they had help from the natives in this part of their journey. All right, so continuing on, they met the Nez Perce tribe at their winter camp, and as they met this tribe, this group of natives gave them supplies, directions. They showed them how they can better make their boats. And part of the directions was how to get to the Columbia and how to get to the Pacific Ocean. So if you go back to the map and pause it after I'm done talking here, you'll see that they took the Snake River up to the Columbia, which was a very bumpy ride. And then from the Columbia River, November 1805, they reached the Pacific Ocean. They decided to stay there and to build a camp until springtime when the weather got nicer. And then on their way back to St. Louis, because there was no boat to pick them up like they thought there would be, they took geological samples. They did collections. In fact, they found about 125 different varieties of animals that they didn't know anything about. They also made other various scientific observations about the geography around them. Some miscellaneous information. Took 2 years total for them to do this trip. And only one man died. In fact, that man died, I read about that. He died maybe from appendicitis, and that was actually at the very beginning of the trip. They also brought natives to trade with, they also brought gifts to trade with the natives. And finally, the very last thought, and then the movie will be done, is that they opened up two things. They opened up more fur trade possibilities, because again, they mapped everything. Also, this idea of manifest destiny, bringing our culture, our ideas in America, and spreading it throughout the continent, was opened up hugely because of what Lewis and Clark did. I want you to think about, first off, why was the fur trade opened up more? Why was manifest destiny, this idea, brought up more? Thank you for watching the film. I look forward to discussing this with you guys in class next.